following taped interview is with Mr. Kenneth Boggs, a longtime member of Local 287. Kenny, you served as president of Local 287 for longer than anyone else in history. I think 8 years, from 1954 to 19. Tell me what date?
1957 to 1965.
1957, 1965. This interview is being taped in Muncie, Indiana on May 2nd. And as I told you earlier, Ken, this interview will go in the university, Ball State University library files, and it will be preserved for posterity. Professors and interested students, either in social, intellectual history, or people who are interested in the history of Muncie and the local community, will be able to go in and listen to this tape and to gain insight from your ideas and from your experiences for many, many years in the future. So it's very rewarding to me to have an opportunity to invite someone in who has been president of Local 287 for such a long period of time and has been reelected more than anyone else in the labor organization at Warner Gear. Kenny, I don't know how far back you go. It seems to me that you were just beginning to become interested in Local 287 at the time I worked at Warner Gear back in the first half of the 50s. And tell me, if you will, just begin by telling me when and how and under what conditions you became interested in Local 287 and you became interested in a position of leadership and when you won your first election. Let's start from there.
Well, I was hired May the 5th, 1950. And in September of 1952, I had been around some attended meetings considerably by that time. In fact, I made it a practice almost from the time I was 6 months after we had a 2-week strike in 1950, and this got me interested. Shortly after I joined there, went to work there a couple of months. And I attended meetings after this, and then in September of 1952, I was elected steward. And then we had our 70-day strike in 1953, and I served the 70-day picket duty. And just before the strike ended, some of the old-timers in the union I discussed it with and worked on the picket line with did encourage me to run for recording secretary. I was elected by 4 votes.
What year was that, Ken?
1953. And I was recording secretary for 2 years, and then I was elected vice president for 1 year, and then I run for president, was defeated. And the following year, I run for president, was elected, and then for 4 terms afterwards, I was the first 2-year term president of Local 287. Well, then I run for a negotiating committee last year and was elected for that. I spent 3 years back on the job working in the intervening time.
Let me ask you some questions about Local 287 while you were president, Ken, if I may. What do you remember as some of the highlights, some of the outstanding achievements of the local, or outstanding what we might call landmarks or major happenings or events during the 8 years that you served as president of the local?
Well, Danny, there was something that happened prior to my election which
makes a greater impression.
No, it doesn't make a greater impression, but the details and the final working out of these things was done right after the start of my administration as president. And I'm talking about the negotiating of the SUB contracts in 1955. Of course, the only way you could draw the supplemental unemployment benefits was after you had entirely exhausted your unemployment compensation from the state. So in effect, what happened was it was almost a useless program, but it did serve one purpose. It built up a fund in these years that was needed very greatly later on. The state legislature in the after we negotiated the SUB program with Warner Gear, and quite a coincidence, one of the state legislators, the state representative from Muncie, was also a labor relations man at Warner Gear, and he was one of the groups that the Republican-dominated legislature which passed the law, which in effect said that if you drew from a privately financed plan, you would have to return the amount to the state in excess of your unemployment compensation.
John, what is, or Kenny, what is SUB? Now, you and I know, but I wonder if the student would know who's...
Supplemental unemployment benefits. It's a plan financed by 5 cents per hour for every man-hour worked in the plant. And theoretically, and well, actually, by the wording of the language itself in the contract, if we had not have put the 5 cents an hour into the plant, we would have received it on our paycheck. So it's actually, we financed our own plan. But there are certain people in the state who classed this as rocking chair money, and it was terrible and so on, even though person after person lost their home and their cars and went without because of the low unemployment compensation benefits. There was still opposition to us drawing this our own money.
What it amounts to, really, it seems to me then, as sort of a common pool of savings.
That's exactly
that
right.
the workers have.
Now, it wasn't for any individual worker, but was for people in a certain category who were laid off through no fault of their own. The company had a reduction of orders, and they were laid off. And you know, Danny, from your experience here, as well as I know, that we've experienced some tremendous layoffs, and up to 1,000 people a lot of times laid off in Muncie from Warner Gear, plus a lot of other manufacturing plants such as Delco, Remy, and Chivy may have a corresponding layoff because of a decrease in the automobile industry. And this made a tremendous amount of people unemployed in Muncie, and it was impossible to get jobs. So this was not only true here, it was true throughout the United States where we had automobile manufacturing plants or any places supplied to these automobile manufacturing plants. So it was a real problem sustained by our membership, but should have had some action taken on it.
All right, so in 1955 then, you got the SUB plan in the contract.
Right.
Have there been any changes?
Tremendous.
All right, you want to tell me about some of the changes?
Before I get into that, though, I might say this, that we spent thousands and thousands of dollars, not only locally, but all over the state of Indiana, educating the people of Indiana as to the facts that I related here of what the plan really was, because the Chamber of Commerce and businesses had put it out that this would cost additional tax money to the taxpayer, and in many cases they bought it. We had to put out the actual facts, as I said, I related to you. And in the process of this, in 1959, we did have a completely changed legislature with Democrat dominated. And they changed the law, the unemployment compensation law, to provide so that we could draw our employment compensation benefits and our supplemental unemployment benefits at the same time. Of course, it increased tremendously. We started off at 50% of a weekly pay. And now it's up to, well, we don't have the full pattern here. We didn't quite get it to 67. But the full pattern now, and I have every reason to assume we'll arrive at this in 1970 if things work out right, is 95% of your pay less $7.50.
All right.
Plus it pays for the total cost of your insurance. That is the hospital, surgical, and medical insurance. It pays for this as long as you draw the SUB. Then your insurance is also paid for while you're on layoff. This includes you and your family, too.
All right, so you have to be concerned with two things here. Number one is getting a contract provision that enables the workers to save this percentage of what would be their paycheck. And the second thing you have to do is to try to work through politics, it seems to me, to get the state legislature to adopt a program that will enable you to draw this money out under conditions most advantageous to the worker.
Right.
And it's been a twofold approach.
It had to be in this particular case.
Well, now this raises another interesting question, which I hadn't intended to lead into this soon, but there are some of the, especially the craft-oriented union members who are dedicated to the attitude or to the philosophy of unionism, that you ought to only be concerned with working conditions on the machine, with hours of work, and with the paycheck of the individual worker that he takes home, and that labor unions as such ought not to become involved in social issues outside the shop or in political issues outside the local union politics of getting elected to the various positions of leadership within the local union. But they feel that it's wrong for unions to participate in the election of state representatives, state governors, or federal congressmen, or presidents, and other political leaders. Now, it seems to me that you've suggested a reason here why you think that it's legitimate and maybe even necessary and desirable for a labor union to become concerned about politics within the state?
Well, Danny, I like the one word you used more than any other. It's an absolute necessity. We can't survive without it. We also had an attempt. We had a union security clause, and of course you know what they are. They're something, our contract is voted on by the membership as such, and a majority has to accept it. And when you put a union security clause in a contract which requires that after a certain length of time a member join the union, this is voted on by the entire membership, so it is a democratic process. And yet the same sort of people who went down and voted in the state legislature and voted against our drawing SUB benefits also passed the law after it went into effect after the Democratic legislature left there, and then a Republican legislature was elected after that. Then they passed a law which put into effect, which, you know, Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley law permits the state can pass stricter union legislation. And they did pass a law which did away with our union security clause, and no longer did a person have to belong to the union. Now, for some period of time, we had neither the union security clause nor the other clause, which requires that they pay an equal amount.
Did you lose membership during this period of time, Kenny?
We made an intensive drive with our membership. We had a tremendous fight with the company. We've had wildcat walkouts because of the company trying to restrict our efforts. And of course, the only effort that was there, of course, we have arbitration. You were there when it was negotiated in the contract. A tremendous expense, and they would create all kinds of problems. And thinking that if we didn't have enough money, I assume, and I know this is to be true, I've read too much on it, that if they could cost our treasury enough and the membership, then if we didn't have our membership all belong, our treasury would deplete, we couldn't represent our members, and therefore our union would drop off accordingly. We fought the company tooth and toenail on this. Everyone that we had some 300 or 400 people hired in this period of time, and eventually all of them joined the union. It just took more effort on our part. Maybe this is good in a way that it took more effort. Maybe they got more of an education on what the union's all about, this particular part of it. But the whole problem is what was the primary motive of the company and the legislature, and this was to destroy our union. Now, these are two instances, and there's many more, why it's an absolute necessity that we take part in politics. One other reason, and a real strong reason to me, for years, and I think this was true when you were there, Danny, factory inspectors, which is supposed to be for our benefit, they're appointed for the benefit of the people in the shop to protect their rights, to make sure the conditions in the factory are right as they should be by state law. We were never able to contact a factory inspector. We never could talk to one. When they came into Warner Gear, it was kept from us. The operators were told explicit orders not to tell us when they came in, so that we would have no idea when we were there. We had no cooperation at all until such time as Matt Welch was elected governor of the state of Indiana. Following his election, in a complete surprise to Warner Gear, we did get a man appointed as factory inspector who came to us and asked us if we had problems. We had Hobart Butler, the commissioner of labor, who told us this is the way it would be. Matt Welch promised us this. This is one reason we were behind him. The first instance we ever applied this at Warner Gear, I thought Warner Gear management would blow sky high. But we insisted we were going with this man. We were going to show him where our problems were. We did so against the company's very explicit orders that we couldn't, but we did anyway. And for the period of time that Matt Welch was governor, we had complete cooperation from them on solving a tremendous amount of factory problems that we had on safety and other hazardous conditions within the plant.
Well, this is really quite interesting. Kenny, one thing that occurs to me to be an interesting point is that every time I talk with someone, I ask them when the local was officially accepted, when the union was recognized by the company and accepted as the collective bargaining agent of the employees. And of course, you know, this was 1937, according to the contract and the vote sponsored by the National Labor Relations Board and the stories in the newspapers. But most of the old-timers tell me they give a different date. They say, well, not really until after the strike of 39, or not really until after the big strike during World War II, or someone said not really until about 1950. Now, you've indicated to me here that you suspect the company might not be too unhappy if they were able to dissolve the union or to make it relatively ineffective in the 1950s.
Oh, definitely.
Right?
Definitely.
Do you think then that Warner doesn't really, even today, believe that the union is advantageous to the company as well as to the workers?
As far as being advantageous to the company as such, I don't think the company would, at least some thinking people within the company, the ones that do have an open mind, I don't think they would argue this point. But they will argue the point that it's not advantageous to the man who wants to tell you what you're going to do. And of course, we have this many places in management. They don't hold with the idea that a man that works in the shop, their management, and he should never tell them what to do. And this type of individual, like I want to reiterate, not all of them are like this, but that type of individual definitely would like to see the union out of there yet today. Yet some of them I know, and it only makes sense, I think, to almost any thinking person, that it's better to deal with a few people to represent the people than it is all the people.
Ken, you came to the labor movement relatively recently. At least you were not there back in the 30s. You came in 1950, I believe you indicated. We sometimes lose sight of the fact that it's been as long since 1950. That's been, what, 19 years. If you go back 19 years prior to that time, there wasn't a Local 287. So that's been a good way back in the history of the local. But what do you see as the major advantages, the major attractions to a factory worker joining the union? Why should a worker on the machine or on the assembly line out at Warner be attracted to Local 287?
Well, if you're talking about a new man,
in 1950, when you went there.
In 1950, Danny, as far as what I seen at the time, even then I could see, I'd worked for several years prior to this. In fact, I'd been on my own since I was 13 practically. But I could see a tremendous advantage between working there and an ununion place. More freedom, for one thing, more freedom of expression, more freedom as an individual. To me, this is one of the greatest things that you have under a union. And of course, the other is the seniority. Now, this isn't always an advantage, but at certain stages of life, and especially latter stages, it's extremely advantage. It's an extreme advantage to have seniority. But things have developed much more. In 1952 or 53, I listened to a man who had been active in this union for years, saying he thought he would get into some other field of work other than union because he thought unions had gone as far as they could go.
Yes. Do you hear this today?
Now, we have gone far more since that period of time, since that time, than we ever did before that. Our advantages have increased so much over that there is really no comparison. What they had in 1950 holds no comparison to what we have today. It was almost nothing compared to what we have today.
All right, let's go back then and then list some of the other things that you can identify as achievements during your long term as president. You list, first of all, the supplemental unemployment benefits.
This has increased a tremendous amount.
Yeah, and there's
it will go to 100% of pay.
All right, now does this come about through negotiations with the company, or must it come about through legislative action at Indianapolis?
It came about through negotiations with the company, but we never would have had it if we had not have changed the law in the state of Indiana. If we hadn't got an entirely new breed of people down there, and by this it just happened to be Democrats instead of Republicans, if we hadn't changed that entirely, we wouldn't even have SUV. In fact, some of the people in our shop, the older people especially, who thought they would never be able to draw SUV, made a concentrated move before 1959 to destroy the SUV altogether and get the 5 cents per hour that went in for the amount of hours they'd worked up to that time, put it back in their pocket. But yet we find in 1958 a typical example of a man at Plant 1 who had 22 years seniority in 1958 when we went down to 2,100 people from a top before that of 4,500. And he was laid off. He was toolroom clerk. Never thought he ever would be. One of the greatest movements, one of the greatest persons in the movement to do away with the SUV. 22 years seniority, and he was laid off. Then he could see the advantage of SUV, and he no longer fought it. And we had a tremendously close vote It was shortly after I was elected president, not too long, and we had this demand for a special meeting, of course, which it was given to him. And the vote was very close. The SUB votes did hold out, and we retained it. And it's one of the greatest advantages we've had in our shop overall.
You mean there were many members of the local union who were opposed to the idea of SUB?
Well, the older men didn't think they'd ever get laid off, and they wanted their money in their pocket. And besides this, they had the argument that we'll never be able to draw it anyway because of the action taken by the state legislature.
Well, did any of the young people use the argument about Social Security benefits and remind the older fellows that they would, that the older fellows would be benefiting and have been benefiting for 30 or 40 years at the expense of the young people as far as Social Security is concerned?
Danny, you can even find a closer argument in that. We were putting more money into the pension program at Warner Gear at that time than we were the SUB. So you could even entirely forget it, the pension security, or the Social Security, and dwell on the amount of money put into pension. No, the older people didn't do this. The younger people just simply fought to retain it because some of us told them, we will make an all-out fight. We'll spend everything that's necessary to get this across the state of Indiana. We will change this legislature so we can draw it.
And it was a fairly close vote within your local.
Very, very close. Very close.
Okay, well, what are some of the other achievements of your administration?
Well, I don't know that they were done during my period of time. Some of the achievements of my administration that I feel real close to were not as great, in my opinion, as some of the things that was negotiated at that time, which, by the way, is a part of a national pattern. Our pension program. The way it started in 1950 was something. Somewhere around $2 a month for each year of service. $2.25, I think. And now we're up to $5.75 a month for each year of service. And if a man's 60 years of age and has 30 years seniority, he can retire on $400 a month till he's 65, and then he can draw his Social Security plus this $5.75 a month for each year of service. And of course, this is, to me, is one of the greatest gains we've made. We've made gains in the SUB, a corresponding amount, not quite as good. And now the pension will get greater. It'll grow. We've got so much to grow too, Danny. There's so much yet to be done. In all phases, in every phase, there's so much yet to be done.
No one else has emphasized this. So this is, I suppose, it suggests the difference in the perspective of a young man who still has several years ahead of him in the movement, and someone who's retired.
Yes.
Yeah, but in the movement, the people I've been talking with are now 65 and over, most of them, and they, by and large, perhaps quite naturally, emphasize the major things that they achieved in the 30s and 40s.
And
but you're, well, you're the only person, and I think it's significant. I think it probably reflects the fact that you're 45 instead of being retired and over 65, and it's a different perspective, a different point of view. And I have, from time to time, stopped and said to some of my good friends and former associates who now are retired, and they've been so helpful in telling me about the movement back in the 30s and 40s. And I have stopped and said, well, now where do they go from here? And they're a little pessimistic, many of them, I might say. They feel that that the young people probably are not going to continue to have the kind of aspirations that were prevalent back in the 30s and 40s. And now you project a different point of view here, and I think this is interesting. Go ahead.
Danny, I'd like to go ahead a little bit further on this particular subject you just now brought up about the young person. You see, we tend, as we grow older, now, I have attended Ball State for a couple of years, so maybe it's taken me back a while, and maybe it's made me realize some of the ability and the integrity and the knowledge and the know-how of some of these younger people, or possibly some of these other fellows haven't, and I might not have if I hadn't been involved there. And then also I've been discussing some problems with our SUB with the younger people in the plant, and this has brought home more to me the problems and possibly to some of the others. Now, the whole labor movement grew out of discontent. They were dissatisfied with their conditions. Now, the young man today doesn't necessarily appreciate what he's got. Shouldn't we be thankful to a degree that he doesn't? If he was thankful with what he now has, then he would not be striving for any more. They're not. I want them to know, and like me, I appreciate the men who started this. I have a great deal of respect for them. The conditions under which they fought for it was much harder than what I've had to fight to retain it and build on it. Much, much harder conditions. different set of conditions. There was some advantage in those days to the fact that, Warner Gear had a stranglehold on the automobile industry, and they could say, shut her down, and they hurt a lot of people. It's not like that anymore. So there is some comparable struggle. It wasn't all done in the 30s, but I want to emphasize that I have a great deal of respect for the men that did it. But by these young guys, and the young fellows, I want them to know where we were and where we came from and what it took to develop these programs, what it took to save some of the programs, just as the fight that I had right after elected president to retain the SUB. To me, this was a terrific struggle for me.
Well, now,
because I was one of the younger guys, and I could have very well been knocked down.
That's right.
But let me dwell just a point on this. This is a lead up to this one point. I'm thankful also that the young people are not content. They're not satisfied with what they have. Because if we were all satisfied with what we have, like the older man that you talked to now, and if we were all pessimistic about the future, then there wouldn't be a future. I'm glad they are discontented to a degree. I think there's bounds for it. Everyone knows when you're in it for a few years that you're only going to get so much at a time. You have to progress slowly. This is not only true here, it's true nationally. Everything you get into, it takes years and years to build up to something that's great. You start and you keep talking and talking and talking and you get there. I'm glad the young fellows are discontented to a degree.
All right, very fine. And I wonder now, I probably should correct one impression which may be just a little bit skewed from what it should be. And I don't mean to say that I get the impression from the older fellows that they believe the young people ought to be satisfied, but I do think that they have the impression, and I might say that this is shared by a lot of social thinkers today, that the young people feel that there isn't anything else to continue striving for, comparable to the motivating factors that were prevalent in the 1930s, 1940s, when people were looking for seniority rights, their recognition, looking for minimum wages, and this sort of thing. And these were the obstacles that the fellows who are retired now had to overcome back in the 30s. And they look upon this, of course, as a major achievement. And they believe, by and large, I think now that that labor has arrived. And there are many social thinkers, and there are many labor representatives who view labor today as being middle class and complacent, and bourgeoisie, to borrow a phrase from European connotations. So many people are concerned about this. Now, if the young people still have a concern about their own future, and if they are willing to go ahead and make the necessary sacrifices in order to aspire to something, I think the main thing that some of the social thinkers, maybe some of the older people, are concerned about is that they really are not sure that the young people, number one, understand what the labor movement is about and what the sacrifices were about back in the 30s and 40s, and how all of the economic gains that they have made came about. And secondly, like every older generation, probably from the time of Hesiod, 800 BC, when we grow older, we are far from certain that the young people are going to be able and willing to take up the harness and go forward with the programs that we began. And a lot of people are beginning to wonder, what are the ideals that are going to keep the young people attached to the philosophy of the labor movement? Are they going to the ideals that are going to motivate them to keep the labor movement alive and viable and thriving and dynamic and progressive and successful, you know? And they're afraid. They're sincere about it. They're afraid that if the young people just take everything for granted, that they'll lose interest in the labor movement, and that the time may come when the labor union will be lost, and the philosophy and the ideals behind it may be lost.
No, I have every reason to believe that there is this possibility, Danny. But then, maybe they won't understand, like you and I do. We were enough close to it. I know I was close enough to it before I ever came to Warner Gear. And of course, I've done a lot of studying of the labor movement. And these ideals are instilled in me. There's no question about it. What we stand for, how we got there, and so on, and really who formed it. They may not know this, but I think they realize keep it going. This is the only future the working man has, is through an organization such as this.
Kenny, what is being done by way of educating the young people in the labor union philosophy and ideals and goals and so forth? Is it all informal? Now, you mentioned that you have talked to some of the young people yourself, and a few of the others have. Is there any ongoing program designed to, I suppose, indoctrinate, as good a word as any, young people with the philosophy of the labor union movement?
There's a program being developed by the International Union, but it hasn't been put into effect yet in the local union. It's just in the planning stage now. Danny, I don't know that this will create much enthusiasm either.
Go ahead.
Well, simply because some of our older people, you know this, our older people, not near all of them, were instilled with the idea of unionism. You know, there was a very small amount. Proportionately, I think we have probably the same percentage of young people now who will carry it forward. Maybe, like I said a while ago, not for the same reasons, not the same ideals. It's a matter of self-preservation, I think, will carry it on. But I know this, that there were very few people who are really the lifeblood of our union. Very few people through the years have been. There's always just a certain percentage that will carry it on.
I mentioned to John Wells, whom I interviewed a few minutes ago, or earlier in the evening, that a poll taken in Detroit back in the late 1940s indicated that in excess of 90% of the members of UAW credited their union with bringing benefits to them. Do you have any idea whether this percentage would hold up today in Warner Gear among the employees that you're working with? Do you feel that in excess of 90% of the people, even though they're not active leaders in the labor movement, believe that they benefit from the labor union activity?
I think that 90% would, if you exclude the people that's been hired within the last few months, the ones who really have no knowledge of the shop whatsoever yet as far as the union. But the ones who have been here at least 4 or 5 years, I think you'd get a 90% vote from there on out that still realize the union is the one that gained this form. Yes, I think it's still there.
All right. Let's go back now to your presidency of Local 287 again. Now, Local 287 is the largest local in the community. Am I right on that?
That's right.
What did you do while you were president, if anything, to provide leadership or provide guidance or cooperation, perhaps is a better word, for labor in Muncie in general? Is there any coordinating or cooperative effort between the various labor organizations in Muncie, or is each one a separate and autonomous and almost an isolated labor union movement of its own?
Danny, it is more today than it has been. Of course, one reason for it is the separation of the UAW from the AFL-CIO. Certainly, the UAW in Muncie has a predominant amount of union members, that is, of the affiliated organizations of the AFL-CIO. This isn't the sole reason, though. We went through many strikes. Local 287, I mean, we helped on many strikes. There's various element picket line in the 8 years I was president that I didn't visit. And, of course, I even went to jail on the Hotel Roberts picket line. It wasn't necessary that I be there walking, but to preserve our local. But to help other people who needed help, it was necessary. We made sacrifices then. I'm not talking about we as me. I'm talking about several of us did it. We walked picket lines. We'd go out at 5 o'clock in the morning before we went to work to help walk picket lines. We chased some scabs out of the lawnmower shop over here on 18th Street and chased them back to Rushville with pretty dire threats of what would happen if they come back and scabbed again where our plant was out on strike. We helped the plant out here at the Muncie Reclamation. There's been many and many a plant that we've walked the picket line on, and even in 8 and 10 degrees below zero. I see none of this going on now. There is no participation. We did have the council going at that time, and we worked pretty strenuously through the council. The whole organization did. We
What
also
is the council?
Delaware County Industrial Union Council is composed of all the unions that wish to affiliate within the Delaware County.
Do most unions in the county affiliate with it?
Most of them did. Right now, like I say, the UAW doesn't because we have we're no longer affiliated with the AFL-CIO.
Are you? Would it be possible though? Are you permitted to affiliate with this county council if you wanted to, even though you're no longer affiliated with the AFL-CIO?
I don't think so. I don't think the AFL-CIO would permit it.
I see.
Because the whole organization is not affiliated.
Well, do you think to this degree then that your withdrawal or the locals' withdrawal or the international union, the UAW's withdrawal from the AFL-CIO may have had some what we might call unfavorable effects on the people in certain local communities?
It could have had as far as the community affairs are concerned, but I must add this, that almost invariably, being the largest local, having the most facilities and the opportunity to do so, to use them in the manner that was needed, very seldom was a request ever went to the Delaware County Council on help. Invariably, the years I was president, it came to be direct from a local wanting assistance. And then I, in turn, would contact other local unions to go help.
All right. What are some of the other activities that the local participated in while you were president? Did the local participate in any other civic or organizational activities within the community outside Warren-Air?
Danny, yes, we participated in any number of civic activities. And I say this about Johnny Wells. He was one of the leading exponents and one of the leading people to get out and work in these particular organizations and help. Yes, we participated in any number of things, just almost everything that was going on in the community. We donated $500 one time to help to start the drive off for a Southside YMCA because of the problems we had here. It was built over here on Willard Street.
Well, now this is finally coming about, isn't it?
Yes. Well, no, it's there now.
It's there now.
But I think we were the first one to donate $500 to it. Of course, there was controversy over it. Why should we do this? But once again, it was for the benefit of the community. We have donated money ever since I can remember, to all kinds of causes within this community.
And time?
And time. Money and time. And it'd be awful difficult to go through and try to even begin to enumerate all of them.
Ken, do you encourage leaders of Local 287 to participate in civic affairs within the community?
Absolutely.
How about the membership of Local 287?
I think they should too.
Well, does the membership think that it's a good thing for the leadership of Local 287 to participate in civic affairs, or do they feel that the leadership ought to stick strictly to the affairs of Local 287? Do you have any idea on that?
Oh, yes, Danny. I've had criticism for it, and I've had praise for it.
I see.
Now, what the percentage would be, it would be hard to tell. There is quite a number of people, though, who believe, just as you stated, that we should restrict ourselves strictly to the local. We and our four and no more.
Right. Ken, there have been several people come out of Local 287 and gone into public life and gotten themselves elected to various positions, state representative, city council, and even mayor now. We have Paul Cooley, who's a good friend of yours, I know, a good friend of mine, who was one time president of Local 287, as you were. How many people can you think of who have come out of the local that have gone into politics and held positions? Are there any that you can think of in addition to those?
In addition, well, you named Paul Cooley. Did you name Orville Roddifer?
No, I did not.
The city councilman. And of course, George Stevenson was state representative. Charles Weeks was state representative. Walter Claspel was state representative. There's others.
Leonard Thomas was
Lefty. Yes, Leonard Thomas was a
county commissioner. Right. There may have been others.
There are others.
John Wells ran for state representative one time.
Yes.
And there, of course, have been others probably who have, there have been others, no doubt, elected that we have omitted. But this is an example then. Well, now, do you think their membership in the local helped them to gain prestige and positions of influence and leadership in the community?
I think that helped, but in almost all these cases that we've mentioned, these persons also developed by community action of their own, just their own time and effort. They have developed themselves also along with, it just seemed to, if they do the one, they do the other. They were involved in the local union, each and every one of these people were involved in the local union, but they also devoted time to outside affairs too. Another one I might mention that we've forgotten is Pete Anthony, Sheriff
That's
Pete
right.
Anthony, and he was on the
That's right.
Republican ticket, and the people at Warner Gear did back him.
Yes, that's
And
right.
of course, we had a man that wasn't in the union, I mentioned a while ago, who the people at Warner Gear also backed for years until they found out that he was one of the fellows that went down and voted against supplementation of SUB.
Oh, I see.
And,
He was with management?
But for
Right.
years, they did support this man until they found out what he was doing.
Ken, and this is, I suppose, an opinion question again. Is there hostility, hardcore resentment on the part of the machine operator to management, or on the part of management to the machine operator?
Danny, we're getting into a particular phase of that now. That, in my opinion, like I said, I'm on the negotiating committee, and I'm close to these problems again. We're into a phase now where the company.
You remember the negotiating committee this year?
This year.
I see.
And we're into a phase now where the company is protesting that the costs are too high, the men are turning in too much day work and setup time. In fact, they quoted to us by the team of experts 8% excess. And the men on the lines are protesting that the work is harder, and by that I mean that they have to do much more to make their required amount of points, which does produce them a decent pay. And right now we're set on a collision course. I don't know where it's going to wind up, but to me it will wind up with some, it could wind up in a strike, it could wind up in almost anything, but we are set on a course right now. It's going to lead us into direct conflict. There's no question about it.
But as a matter of philosophy, what does labor want from management? What does Local 287 want from Warner Gear? What kind of relationship do you want with Warner Gear?
Well, Danny, I can't say this to the local. I know what my opinion is. I want them to look at problems as they should be looked at. We want them to keep pace. We find in many cases where their objections to us is based on at times faulty workmanship or things like this, to where everything's laid at our door, the faults, and yet we find in our investigations, and I think we are growing up in the local, it's more now than beat on the table. You use your head. You try to work out methods without walking out of the shop. And we find methods now when we really start using our heads where the company can improve their management to a great degree. And yet we find out that they don't. They're lax as they can be in several areas of management. They have set procedures and they use them come hell or high water, and that's the way they want to do it. And if they would improve these, then I think we want this improved, because we can see here where there's a tremendous amount of loss to us. I know I'm one man in the union that wants them to improve this. I don't want them to use the annual improvement factor as a whip over my head. It was never intended that way. It meant more money for the same amount of work through technological increases or betterment. And this is one thing I want them. I want them to improve their management to the point to where I can get the benefits that people in other places are getting. As the industry keeps pace and they get their benefits, we're going into dental procedures. Our insurance has improved tremendously. It'll improve more. $80 a week we're getting on weekly benefits is not sufficient in this day and age. It should be higher than this. All these things that we want the better things of life, and we want our management to increase to the point to where they can do it. But there is one more point we want them to do. I do. I'll put it like this, I do. When we have a problem, and where it's a moral issue and should be done, we want the company to quit saying to us, this is the contract. We negotiate it. We don't run our company on moral principles. We run it to make money. We want them to look at things in an intelligent manner and use some sense and reason. If they ever expect it out of us, they're going to have to use it. Danny, I'll mention one more thing. They had a lot of problems in the 30s But I think, as you know, the no strike clause was negotiated in 1952 in our contract. And maybe I'm patting myself on the back by saying this. I don't mean it that way. But you know the wildcat walkouts we had for years, and a lot of times it was union member against union member, or one faction against another faction, which caused this. I'd made up my mind that if I ever did get in a position in this union to show some responsibility, I was going to do it. And I think we went through the darndest transition period from 57 till 65 that this local union's ever seen. We went from a period of using hammer and table, fist and table, however you want to put it, and the walkout method, which really accomplished very little in most cases, to a period of where we arrived, at least in most cases, to where we tried to work it out in another manner. If it meant catching the company when they needed something bad and put pressure on them, then we tried to use that instead of the other method. I didn't believe in the other method, only in extreme cases. I won't say that I'm opposed to on every issue.
Conditions. No.
If they attack their union, try to destroy it, such as they did when they wouldn't let us contact the people to join the union. When the union shop was outlawed, under these conditions, I think it's necessary that we show them we're going to. But
when was the union shop outlawed?
It was in 61, I think. 61. 60. I don't know. It might have been 60 and 61. I think it was.
The so-called right-to-work law was passed in Indiana?
Right. It was about that period of time. And in 61, Warner Gear hired quite a few men.
And management really then took the position that you had no right to contact the workers to encourage them to join the union?
That's right. And they said anyone caught doing it will be disciplined. And I said...
This might be quite suggestive. I hate to draw a conclusion here, but it might be indicative of the kind of... there might be a very good answer to the question as to whether or not the company has accepted the union that's here to stay.
Well, if they have, it's just been the last month or so. I haven't seen it before that.
Well, that's quite interesting. I did want to ask you, if I may, Kenny, about the offshoot of Local 287, Johnny Wells Farmer Labor Small Business Organization. Were you present at the time that this organization was founded? Could you tell me a little bit about the origin of that particular group?
Well, Johnny, of course, has had the Farm Labor Small Business banquets for several years, and he's done a tremendous job on it. This was really developed through the Delaware County Industrial Union Council, where the first program came from. And
who's president of that organization? Leland still?
No, Leland...
Didn't he used to be?
Yes, he was for a long time.
He
Charles Foltz is now.
Who?
Charles Foltz from the Packing House Workers. But Johnny had these for several years, and of course, they were very successful. And of course, it started off first with the labor, and then farm labor, and then farm labor small business. It progressively got bigger. And they've been wonderful banquets through the years. But the particular organization he talks about is, when I was president, we did form a president's organization, that is, presidents of local unions within Delaware County.
Oh, now this I didn't know about, so tell me about that.
Well, we met once a month at one of the restaurants on Sunday mornings to discuss the problems within the unions.
When did you form this organization?
Oh, it was probably 2 years before his organization. It must have been someplace around 62 or 3, someplace along in there. Maybe 61. But I was president of this organization for the length of time it was in existence. And we met, and the main thing was to discuss our problems, see where we were, who needed help, and so on, to where we could help each other. And it was just a combined thing. And I understand now the UAW is now forming the same sort of thing within each county, except with the exception that the international rep is mandatory that he be there. Then he was just invited, but of course they never come.
Ken, how'd you go about organizing this group?
Just went and talked to the local union presidents and got them all together and said, let's join this group for our own benefit.
Did you have any kind of charter or anything, or was it
No,
informal?
Just informal.
But it was participated in well, do you think?
Very well for a long time, and then it, I suppose, like everything else, things got pretty good. Not many problems, and it deteriorated to a certain degree.
Is it still in existence, do you know?
No, it's not in existence. In fact, that's what I was leading up to.
All right, go ahead.
The organization, slowly more people, we used Johnny as the publicity man on it. And even though he wasn't the president, we used him as a publicity man on the thing. If anything come up, and we had a lot of things that we did follow through on at that time. But then it progressively got so other people attended. And then when we went out of existence, we turned our treasury and things over to Johnny. And this is when his Farm Labor Small Business Council started from the treasury, and some of the organization had come into this. there were various people come into it besides presidents, financial secretaries, and just members. And then finally invited other people.
What did you call it then?
Just
You started out calling it the President's
just the President's organization. We never even had dues or anything else.
Well, where did you get your treasury?
You know, I was trying to think a while ago where we got that treasury from. Well, I think it was donated by various local unions into it for programs we'd have. We did take up some collections among ourselves to finance various projects.
What are some of the things you did?
Oh, Danny, it's been so long ago.
How long did you have this for? 5 or 6 years?
No, we just had it a couple of years.
Oh, I see. Did you have speakers in, or?
No. It was just our own individual problems. I'm not talking about individuals as person, but individual locals. And we discussed the various problems we had and what was coming up and what we could do to prevent this. Or if a local was on strike, we wanted to go help them and get an organization together to go help them. Just things like that.
Did you work with the Delaware County Council then?
There were members of the Delaware County Council, which are also members of this, but there was some resentment there. They thought that maybe we were trying to take over some of the functions of the council. Of course, we never intended to. We just did it as a separate organization of presidents alone. It's like always in the labor movement, Tanny. There's a certain amount of jealousy involved in everything you do.
Were you active in the council also?
Oh, yes. Very active in the council. I was a delegate to the council and very active.
Why, let me ask you, why did you feel that this was a desirable thing to do, to organize this President's Council, is what it amounts to, it seems? The President's organization.
Well, one of the reasons, Danny, was I was consulted by other presidents of local unions so much on problems, especially when they needed help. Being the largest organization, I don't think it was me other than I was willing to help. But I was president of the largest organization. We had the facilities to help when they needed it. We had where we could put out materials for propaganda on picket lines and things like this, and then we could get groups together. And we did have the main office up there where we could contact other local unions, others within our building, and I think it just evolved from this that rather than trying to contact them individually, we'd meet once a month to discuss all the problems so we'd have them all together. And this was the reason for it. There was never any attempt to try to grow and enlarge and get bigger with just that and that alone.
All right. Well, it's all very interesting, and it gives an insight into the certain aspects of the history of the local that I had very little knowledge about, and I really appreciated the opportunity to talk with you about it. Are there any other important developments that come to mind during your administration?
Well, Danny, we did enlarge, and I think you'll know this. Very little representation was done. In fact, in 1957, the company wouldn't even let us in to see records on workmen's compensation claims and so on.
That's right.
And in 1957, I did get into this. I thought it was necessary at the local enter this field, and we did. And in 1958, we negotiated where we had a perfect right at any time to represent these people. And we do so up to a certain level. When it gets up to the appeal state, of course, then we leave it up to the lawyer because they normally expect that. On unemployment compensation cases, we have followed some development within the local and carried them clear through to the appellate court. And of course, and we've won the case too in the appellate court. Of course, when it gets to the appellate court stage, we let the lawyer handle it again because, you know, of course, they won't let a local union representative appeal the case to the appellate court. But up through all these procedures, and I might say, by the way, that one particular case we had, to me, was a real boon to the students who worked at Warner Gear and went to college too. For some period of time, the Compensation Bureau would refuse, if a man worked at Warner Gear and went to college, when he was laid off at Warner Gear, his unemployment compensation was cut off right then. Unless he quit college, his unemployment compensation was cut off. Well, we got into the law and found out that this wasn't necessarily true, and I went on down to, we appealed the case, and I went on down to the regional office, and we got John Barty, I think you remember him.
Right, I interviewed him the other day.
We went up to the, John and I went up to the Unemployment Compensation Bureau in Indianapolis, and this is while Matt Welch was president, or was the governor, and we did have access to talk to anybody we wanted to in the state government at that point. And we did get in, and they did change their procedure, and we have it now so that the man, all he's got to do is say that if necessary to get a job, I will quit college and go to this job, and now he receives it. Before that time, it was universal all over the state of Indiana. No one received it unless they quit college at that point. And of course, this was even where a person was primarily employed at Warner Gear, not even a student as such.
Right.
So some of these things we developed the field of representation. We developed more and more into community affairs. I think we developed back into what they had in the 30s, where we helped other local unions when they were in trouble. We'd gotten away from it for a while, but I think we developed back into that era to where we did help people when they were in trouble. And of course, like I said, there was some criticism from people in the local union that the activities and the efforts should have all been devoted within the local. Of course, needless to say, I don't agree with that.
When was your last year as president?
1965.
So you've been out now about 4 years,
Right.
and you've been doing what since that time?
Well, I worked in the shop for 3 years, and then this year I've been on the negotiating committee.
Uh-huh. And you still have a good long tenure ahead of you before retirement, so I'm quite sure that you're going to continue to be active in Local 287 and in community affairs. At least I would hope so with your vast experience at this age. Are there any other comments you would like to make, or any other significant points that you can think of in the next few inches of tape here? We're coming pretty close to the end of the reel.
Well, Danny, the attitude of some of the people in the union, to me, the younger people are not the death of our union. We've got to, not necessarily, they don't care what happened in 36 and 37, and I doubt that if you were that age, that you would care much about what happened in 36 and 37. You really want what's ahead, and to me this is a good way to look. It's all right to know the history, and it's wonderful to know it. It's wonderful to appreciate how you got there. But in most cases, almost all of us look ahead. And the paycheck and the benefits you get are really the primary objectives of the union. That's the only reason it was formed, for the betterment of living. And I don't think these young fellows overall, they might not maintain the same reasons that we built the union for, because then it was almost slavery, of course. But I don't think we need to worry near as much as people say. Mm-hmm. I don't really believe it, I am.
You think, if anything, there's a hope? They have to be.
They have to be,
because those of us who have left it for one reason or another, obviously are not going to be able to continue making the kind of contribution that...
When we lose people, Danny, like you, that could make a contribution, then it has to be picked up somewhere.
And the people who retired, I was thinking of primarily these people, of course, we can't expect to continue to carry the burden, so...
you might have been speaking of that, but I'm not. I'm sincere. People like you who could make a contribution, because it does take brains now, Danny. It does take brains now. The utilization of brains, let me put it.
There has been some concern, I might say, among my colleagues who are professors of college and people who write books on labor and on sociology and human relations and so forth, that there has been in the past decade or so, in the 60s especially, and maybe even earlier than that, a brain drain in the labor movement, because the sons of the old-timers who organized the locals are now going to college and going out and getting jobs in management and the professions and other areas, and they do raise a question as to whether or not this might create a shortage of talent sometime in the future in the labor movement. I don't know, I've heard pros and cons. I suspect that you'll always have some very astute people staying in the shop, and those people are going to invariably become interested in the social conditions of the people and in the human relations aspect of it. And I think they're going to be leadership in the union in the future. I would hope so, at least. Well, again, I can't tell you how greatly I appreciate your kindness and generosity in taking a whole evening on Friday, to come out and be away from your family and talk with me regarding the history of Local 287. Again, I appreciate it very much, and I'm quite sure that many students in the future are going to benefit from your very perceptive and penetrating insights into the history of Local 287 and into the social conditions of the community and to the labor movement in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.